Okay, let's see. Is it running? Yeah. I'm gonna start the second recording because we have 2 recordings. Like this. Okay, somebody talks this test?
Hi.
Yeah, that. Okay. Can somebody say something again?
This is a test.
Hello.
Yeah, that's not working. Okay, then we'll keep it to the first recording. Good. Okay. Okay, now we're ready. Let's see. Windows are closed, doors are closed. The water bottles are opened.
No. Now.
Okay, good. Okay, if anybody needs a break, just maybe give something like this, then I can round up and we can do a break. We'll maybe do 2 topics and then I'll break it anyhow, and then we'll see where we are. And if we have enough material, we can also stop and continue for our next discussion. We'll see where we get us, because I think an hour is more than enough for a podcast session. But we'll see where we get. Okay, I'm gonna start the timer that I also know where we are at. Voila.
Can you hear my background noise? Because I can hear it really loud.
No, we don't hear it.
Oh, good.
It's kind of clear. Yeah, there's no background. I don't hear any background noise.
Great.
If I hear it, I will make a note that I know what time it was and I can schedule it out, but won't be a big issue. All right, good. Okay, let's get started. A few seconds of silence and then I'll do the introductions and then we can get going. Hi, welcome everyone. I'm Tom de Vos, and I'm happy to introduce you to our board members of the Young Committee today for our second podcast for Neuengamme Generations. So with me here today is Svenja.
Hi.
And Francie.
Hello.
And we have another Tom present, Tom Lemmes, also from my hometown, Meeselkiezegem. Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Okay, so actually we have all our board members here today from the Young Committee of Neuengamme, of the IN, but maybe for the people who don't know us yet or don't know the Young Committee, it's a good thing that we tell a bit about what we actually are and what we do. And who better to tell us than our president, Svenja? Maybe you can help us out on this?
Of course, to jog our minds and also to welcome everybody who's new to the story of the Young Committee. We are a group of third and fourth generation descendants of victims of Nazi persecution, and most of us with a connection to the history of the Neuengamme concentration camp and close to Hamburg. And we established this group in 2019 in May because several years we had discussed that there's a unique perspective of third and fourth generation descendants, and there are needs of people with this connection to family members who were persecuted, that we thought that under the umbrella of the Amicale Internationale KZ Neuengamme, the international organization representing the national associations of survivors and relatives of the prisoners of the Neuengamme concentration camp, that we needed to have a group that represents our interests and also gives us a chance to network internationally, and also not just to network for the sake of networking, but also to help people from third and fourth generation to explore their family history and also to find new ways to share their family history. And I mean, this is also why we are here today, to also talk about our own family histories and also to encourage others to share theirs.
Yeah, thank you, Sonia. Indeed, that's true. So yeah, as you see, the Young Committee, we all have our special connection to the former Neuengamme concentration camp, which is located near Hamburg in Germany. Maybe indeed, since we are all third and fourth generation, it might be nice for our audience to get to know us a bit better and to maybe do a bit of deep dive on our personal connection with the former concentration camp. So maybe, Francie, would you like to kick it off and tell us a bit more about maybe yourself and what your connection is to Neuengamme?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I start with myself. I am the great-granddaughter of a persecuted social democrat who lived in Hamburg. I now live in Hamburg myself. I was born there, raised there, worked there, love it. Best city. So he was a social democrat, and of course, because of that, he got fired from his profession right after the Nazis took over in 1933. And he was then, but he had a lot of free time after that. So he got into resistance to fight for his freedom. Being a good anti-fascist, he was doing some, what do you call them again, these leaflet papers with anti-Nazi propaganda. He helped bringing them under the public in Hamburg, and he got arrested for it in 1935 and was charged with preparation of high treason, and got into prison and concentration camp-like prisons for 4 years. He was so lucky to be imprisoned very early, because that time he still had a chance to get out after these 4 years. So he was imprisoned in Hamburg, in Fuhlsbüttel, and after that got transferred to Aschendorfer Moor, which is in the north of Germany as well. I'm sorry, do you hear my cat in the background? No, good. Yeah, he got to Aschendorfer Moor in the north of Germany, which was one of the early concentration camps, and he survived. He was very lucky to survive. I do not know how he did it. I never met him. I could never ask him. But after he got free, of course, the persecution didn't stop. He was still a social democrat. And in the war, he needed to go to the war as well as a soldier. Although the Nazis originally stated that people who were in concentration camps were not allowed to join the army, they later, in the later phase of the war, forced them to join, of course. They needed cannon fodder. So he was a forced soldier. He worked as a medic there, and I think that saved his life as well. Yeah, he survived. I think 2,000 people were sent from Hamburg to the war by force, and only 408 of them returned in 1948. He was one of them. So this is his story, and my story is that when I was younger and needed some school internship, I thought I'd go to a library, and my aunt is a librarian. Is that the right word? I hope so. And she works at Neuengamme Concentration Camp Memorial. What a coincidence. She took me in. She said, well, maybe you want to go to the archive. And that's where I now still work.
Okay,
That's my connection to Neuengamme. I know my great-grandfather, he was not in Neuengamme, but he was in Hamburg. He was persecuted, and I work in Neuengamme. I love Neuengamme. It's a big part of my life, so that's my connection to it. And that's how I all met you.
True. Thank you, Francie, indeed, for a very interesting story. So it's nice to know that we have an archivist from the Neuengamme archive in our group, because that's always very handy if you want to do some very interesting research. And so you'll be our expert archivist from now on. So then welcome to the podcast.
Forward to it.
Okay, and then with us we also have Tom from Neuengamme, Belgium. Feel free to tell your story as well about your connection, Tom.
Yeah, so my background is a bit different. My great-grandfather was actually a simple farmer from a very small village in Neuengamme. And yeah, the other Tom, his great-grandfather was also from there. Apparently, they were neighbors.
Yeah, they were neighbors indeed. So my great-grandfather, Everard, he was the neighbor of your great-grandfather, and they used to live in the same village. Also, he was a farmer too. Yeah, well, mostly everybody at the time was a farmer, so that's quite easy.
Yeah, and yeah, he was arrested as basically a part of an act of vengeance because yeah, a collaborator who worked with the Germans in Belgium, he was shot, and then as sort of vengeance for this murder, he and many other farmers and just basically random people from the village were arrested and then brought to the Neuengamme concentration camp. This happened close to the end of the war, basically, yeah, the last few minutes, you could almost say, before the liberation of Belgium. And yeah, he sadly didn't survive for very long in the camp. He was one of the first to pass away from Neuengamme. And yeah, so for me, it was always a bit of a strange thing because we didn't really know what happened. We know they were taken away. And so for most of my childhood, that was kind of the story. He was taken away to where we don't, kind of know, but we don't really know what happened. And then later on, gradually the story sort of, came up, and then we know, okay, this is really what happened. Yeah, me personally, went in a bit of a different direction. So I studied theoretical physics, so not history or archivist related at all. And now I currently work as a mathematical consultant in a company in the Netherlands. So yeah, I've moved around a little bit. Currently, I'm settled in Bol, Belgium, but yeah, I've lived in quite a few places by now.
Yeah, our world adventurer indeed, Tom is. All right. Yeah, indeed, the story of my personal connection is very much related to yours, of course, Tom, because my great-grandfather was one of the people who was arrested on the 11th of August in 1944, was about 3 weeks before the liberation of Flanders. And he was actually also the first one that passed away in Neuengamme. And the peculiar thing is that your great-grandfather was the second one, if I did my research correctly. So
that is correct.
Yeah, it's very strange how closely related their stories are. But then again, it was more than 100 villagers were arrested inside our town, and in the end, only from the 72 people that got in the Neuengamme camp, only 8 of them were able to return. So it's a tragic conversation or story from our village, of course, in Flanders, but there are so many others. But that's a bit indeed also my personal connection. For me, professionally, I'm a programmer. I have my own IT company here in Belgium, but also I'm involved in the museum that handles about the story, Museum 44 in our village, where I'm happy to be one of the board members, and yeah, where we still work about remembrance education. So the story really sticks from my side as well, and yeah, I'm happy to be in the committee as well on that. So. But Francie, we've heard your story and Tom as well, but I would love to hear the story about Svenja too.
Yes, thank you. And thank you also to the three of you for telling again new details I didn't know. I mean, every time we talk, there's something I learn that I hadn't known about before. Yes, so I also have a professional and a family connection to Neuengamme. My maternal grandparents were persecuted for anti-Semitic reasons. There were Jews from Hungary. My grandmother was from a village that today is in Slovakia. My grandfather was from Budapest, and they were deported in 1944. Both survived Auschwitz and were taken to satellite camps of the Neuengamme camp, and my grandfather was taken to Hanover, and my grandmother to Bremen, and then I only knew my grandmother. I never met my grandfather, so there are many stories I learned about him from my mom and my aunt, and he escaped in the last days of the Camp Ahlem in Hanover, and went to the city center of Hanover, and which was liberated in April 1945. And my grandmother was liberated in Bergen-Belsen, and they met in the Bergen-Belsen camp because it turned into a DP camp after liberation. And she obviously
was... camp?
Pardon?
What is a DP camp?
A displaced persons camp.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool.
Yes, and that's actually also part of my family history, that my family for a long time remained displaced persons. My grandparents met in the DP camp, and there was apparently a family connection before. I mean, my grandparents had not met before, but my grandfather from knew from Budapest a brother of my grandmother, and that was kind of a starting point of a conversation. And he was actually in search of his wife and his daughters, because he had been already married, had 2 daughters, but he had to find out that they had been murdered. And eventually my grandparents decided they wanted to start a family and moved to Hanover. So they never returned to their home countries, but decided to start a new life. And my grandfather was involved in founding the so-called KZ-Ausschuss, which was a self-help organization in Hanover for survivors. And he was very involved in that. And eventually he also, because he had been trained as he had studied law in Hungary, he eventually started working for a government agency involved in now I'm Wiedergutmachung. Is it retribution? So was involved in this. So he had a lot of connections to survivors, etc. And so he was also involved in helping form the Bergen-Belsen Memorial. So I think it runs in the family to be involved in commemoration. And so then when I finished my bachelor's degree, I didn't want to continue right away with my master's, and I decided I needed to do some internships. And my first choice was to do an internship at the Neuengamme Memorial. And that was the starting point also of my professional connection, because after my internship, I started working as a guide for student groups, and eventually I got involved in all kind of seminars, workshops for descendants of victims, but also for descendants of persecutors. And then my roles continued, and I still work there, currently responsible for all things related to using media in the education setting.
Wow, so cool.
I love how we both started as internship and then returned.
Yeah, I still remember, Francie, you doing the internship in Mesolkisium actually a few years ago, right?
Was it an internship, or did you just help out at your big commemoration event? I loved it.
It was call it an exchange instead of an internship. Cool.
Yeah,
right.
it was wonderful.
But I find it so peculiar that hearing our personal stories, we all mostly inherited our commemorative work from somebody else in our family. Because Francie, I think for you it was your aunt, right? She worked at Neuengamme already.
Yes, she still works there, and she is basically the one telling me the story of my great-grandfather. I mean, from my parents' side, from my mother, I just knew. I mean, when I started my internship in 2010, I just knew that, okay, Neuengamme was a place where people were imprisoned and it was very bad, and your great-grandfather was in a similar place. And that was like all I knew, all I really
Yeah.
knew, until then I tried to dig deeper, and my aunt was a very much help there.
Yeah. And for Svenja, it wasn't her grandfather or grandmother.
Yeah.
How was it for you, Tom?
Yeah, for me, it was my grandfather also. So yeah, my parents weren't really involved. And also, yeah, my grandfather telling stories about, things that happened during the war. And then, later on his engagement with the local organization in Mainstakisium.
Yeah, it was the same for me too. For me, it actually started out with my grandmother and her brother, René, who were the founders of the original museum. And yeah, we heard the story. I heard the stories as a small child, from 11, 12 years old, and that's how it happened from my side. So it's kind of peculiar that even though we are located so on different backgrounds, the big story remains the same. And that brings me the question that um, since we see that we're now all third and fourth generation, we already told that we get it from our aunts or grandparents or stuff, that it happens, the commemorative working is different, I think, between these different generations. But how does it differ in your guys' opinion? How do we do things differently than our grandparents or our parents or aunts? Yeah.
I think that, for us, it's different because we sort of happen to be in a sort of, interesting place and time, basically. Because, we're not one of the people who actually lived through it. We didn't immediately see the camps or live through the camps or see someone who came back from the camps directly. So this gives a bit of distance, for the direct victims, like first generation, second generation. Them, it's really what you lived through, and how they sort of now handle it, how they deal with
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, I
And for
see
us,
it as well. Yeah, because for the museum in the Slokizium, we've been doing a lot of interviews with the what we call the first generation war orphans. Actually, it's already second generation probably.
yeah,
We've been doing a lot of interviews like the generation of our grandparents, and you see that for them, it's a lot is very trauma based because they had their whole lives to live with the idea that their father was taken away. So that's something that still becomes very emotional when they have to talk about it almost 75 years or almost 80 years after it happened. Um, that's something that I really see happening again. And I agree that the distance is makes you see things from a different angle. Uh, for instance, when we talk about the perpetrators in the village, they still
mm-hmm.
get very emotional. Where I see that now we from the fourth generation are trying to get in touch with also descendants from the perpetrator side and to hear their stories and what happened with them. And that's something that would have been really not done. I think even a few years ago. Is it this? Is it the same in Hamburg for you guys?
I think yes. I think what's basically is that we as a generation do not have this pain inside of us. We can, if we like what we do now, we talk, and we talk very scientific and clear about it, and it does not tear up old wounds when you two say that your relatives died. It's a matter of fact, and you can speak about it without getting too emotional. It does not mean that you did not care, of course, but it's just that you are able to speak through it without that very emotional based trauma. And I think that's the same even in Hamburg. Maybe Svenja can agree.
Yeah, and I think it's even, let us just consider that it wasn't always common to say people were traumatized. I mean, I think even from the perspective of acknowledging the psychological effects, so much has changed. I mean, even for the survivors, nobody came and offered them psychological help, support, and nobody helped their children or helped the children of the people who were killed to deal with it, to even find a voice. I mean, when we also look at literature, so much of people sharing their stories actually came out so much later. Many documentaries or fictionalized movies came out so much later. I mean, we grew up, I think, in a time when it was much more common that this period was talked about. It was not so, I think, at least from what I know from what my mother and my aunt told me. I mean, yes, you went to, for example, the Bergen-Belsen Memorial on those special occasions, and they had people come to their house who also were survivors, but it wasn't like a thing openly addressed. And whereas I think it's much easier now for us also to talk to our families about this. And I mean, you see, and there are so many moments where you can actually talk about it. You see the Stolpersteine, the stumbling stones. I mean, even with my small son, these are starting points for conversations about this time period. So I think it's not just about us having a more distant connection to those who were persecuted, but it's also time has changed so much.
True. Yeah, that's something that we see here in Belgium as well. That people who have been silent for 70 years, now finally they start telling their story, and they're happy to be able to tell their story. And when we ask them why do they tell it now, that's like, well, at first we didn't want to talk about it because it was too hard, but now we really want to make sure that people don't forget, because probably we're not going to stick around for much longer. And you see people who get now that, because we do interviews like every week almost now with war orphans, you see that it gives them even a bit of closure, that they were able to tell their story, that it is written down. We see that people are now actually getting that bit of closure that they were always been looking for more than 70 years. So that is also, I think, for us a very big motivator to continue what we're doing.
Yeah. Just maybe an archive example, because recently, 2 days ago, I stumbled across a document from, going back, Neuengamme was, after the war, an internment camp from the British, and directly after that became a prison from the city of Hamburg. And I found a letter from the prison side in 1941, where the French begged for coming to do a pilgrimage, and the prison wrote a letter to the city of Hamburg to explain that the time needs to close, that you need to forget what have happened, to not tear up old wounds, and to make this all pass and forget and not talk about it anymore. They even declared that having a modern prison on a former concentration camp is a good memorial.
Wow.
And I was just reading it and thinking, like, okay, I'm getting sick from it. It's so much apart from what we think now. But I think that was common thoughts at that time, only 6 years after the war, to just don't talk about it anymore because it's traumatic, and just be silent.
I think definitely there are a lot of other examples from that time period of people just making it silent, people trying to forget. Even in Belgium, actually, the stories, they only started to rise 40 years after the stuff happened. It was only in the 80s that people really started talking about it, and that's also the time that we grew up. So I think that's indeed, something that we really see shifting, and I think it's for the better, because as you can see now, all these places that were places of cruelty in the Second World War, they are now, if you visit Neuengamme, it's a very serene place that is really bringing honor to the people who are there, in my personal opinion. And you see that on so many different spots in Germany, but also in other places in Europe as well. But it's only an effort of the last few years, I think. In the last 20 years, you've seen so much difference in new memorials, new museums. I think even last year a new museum popped up in Kerdelegen, right? So yeah, it's good effort, and it keeps on happening. Yeah. But then again, I find it so peculiar because we are now people from Belgium and Germany. Are we alone in this? Is this peculiar for us, or are there others? Is there do we see it bigger happening as well?
I think we actually do see that it's a bigger thing, because we really have a lot of people from different countries in our network, and I'm in touch with a lot of people from other countries, from Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Southern Europe, Southeast Europe, and it's really I find it's appropriate to call us like a pan-European network, and because I think our histories, our family histories, bring us together, and I think there are many. When we talk, when we email, there are many things where I think it's easy to kind of nod and in agreement, but there are also very their experiences that are very much tied to the countries where these people grew up in, because even though we really do have that pan-European culture of remembrance, I mean, you see it when you come to the commemorative events at the Neuengamme Memorial, how people from many different countries attending, or when you had your inauguration of the museum in Meenzel-Kieskem. I mean, there were people from so many countries in attendance, and it brings people together, and you have this mixture of languages and etc. But there are also things that I think are very unique in the experiences of, I mean, the experiences of people in some Western European countries are very different from Eastern European experiences, or even countries where some countries have a very big focus on the resistance and are slower maybe to explore that there was collaboration, and some countries are much more advanced in regard to acknowledging this, and that, of course, that's, I mean, that national narrative about that time period varies. Or we have, I mean, the experience of people living, having grown up in countries that haven't been democracies for so long. I mean, be it for Southern Europe, Spain, or even Eastern European countries. And we have the West Balkans, who had the war in the 90s, and where a lot of the conflicts basically hanging over from World War II kind of came up again. So it's we have all a common denominator but we also all bring very unique perspectives.
Yeah, I like the term of the pan-European network thingy because I feel it as well. You have so many different people from different backgrounds coming together, commemorating together, and everybody has their own story. But I see it too that it's not only Germany and Belgium. We've heard so many stories from Putten in the Netherlands, Murat in France, Warsaw in Poland. Those stories are now getting familiar as well. They're very similar to what happened also, for instance, in our town in Meeselkiezigen. But then you have also all these personal stories. Um, it all comes together, doesn't it?
It does. And for me, I love everything pan. I mean, not just for most people, I think it's sexuality orientated, but the phrase pan, this comes from an old Greek word. It's a prefix that means whole or comprehensive or everything. So it's an including phrase. And that, for me, I think it's also always suggesting tolerance. And what I learned in university when we discussed National Socialism in Germany, my professor always said it's defined by inclusion and exclusion. I mean, being inside of the Volksgemeinschaft and being excluded from in, leading to horrendous pain. So I think seeing things as pan and seeing the whole picture of it and taking everyone with different stories in and finding a common ground in it, it's also some kind of revenge on this including and excluding aspect the Nazis tried to do with the society. So when I work in the archive, I get emails from not just all from Europe, but also all from the world. I mean, we had colonies, French colonies, former French colonies that are now getting in touch with Neuengamme and want to visit. I get mails from the US from people who have had descendants in Europe that moved to the US after the war, and people from China. I mean, there were people of color in concentration camps. And so we always need to include that we had like a whole world society inside these camps. So I really like this term pan-European.
Yeah, so nice. But indeed, it's true that when you meet somebody, like we're all descendants from, when you meet somebody else, and once you know, the story really starts going. It's like there is some instant bond between people. I don't know, have you felt this too with some other people that you've met? Is this a thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
It's
I've seen it with the people from Putten. I've met them a few years ago, and they just told their story of their village, and then it was their grandfather, great grandfather, and it was instantly like, yeah, but mine was too, and it instantly creates this connection. And we meet regularly. We talk to each other, even if we're across other countries, and that's also I think I like it that you have this kind of connection with other people.
And I
Yeah.
think you are open when you meet other descendants because you feel kind of in a safe room. I always notice the change when I work in the archive and people come to me as descendants and they see me as a historian. Sorry, my English is bad. They see me only history related, scientific related, and they try to be historic and scientific and try to be unemotionally. And then sometimes when it fits into the conversation, I try to add in that I'm also a descendant, and I see an immediate change in them, how they see me and how they speak to me and how they suddenly get open and tell their feelings. I really like to see the change on how people see you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's also very special about meeting other descendants is that there are certain things you don't have to explain. I don't have to explain to you why things that happened almost 80 years ago matter to me. why I have why on some days it makes me much more emotional to talk about my family history than on other days, or I feel that sometimes I think about what I learned from descendants, and it makes me, even though it is very different from my family history, it makes me very emotional because I have that connection that is much stronger than I have to maybe other people I know. And I must say that with a lot of other people I know, I don't really talk about my family history. I don't like talking about my family history in, I don't know, non-professional settings with people I know have a different family history, because there's, in a sense, there's a gap between us, a gap of understanding that can't be bridged, at least not in a private setting, or it takes a long time to bridge it.
Yeah, I always have this thing in mind where I'm talking to other people and it sort of plays in my mind like, yeah, I have this story, but it's not just something you can easily bring up. It always feels like you're dropping a bomb in a conversation when, yeah, you sort of start with this whole story.
I hate like meeting new people and they ask, oh, what are you doing for a living? And I'm saying, yeah, I work in a concentration camp memorial. And it's immediate silence. And everybody's like, oh, are you okay? How are you
Really?
feeling working there? They get into this voice of trying to comfort me. And I'm like, I'm
Really?
totally fine. I love my job.
Yeah.
Oh, I have a recommendation to you, Franzi. Just say
Oh,
you
yeah.
work at a historical museum or a history museum, and then if they're really interested, they'll ask you. But most people, because they don't care about history, they'll just stop there, and they
Oh, yeah, that's
then
good.
you don't have to. So it's
Yeah, that
Maybe that's
I
a
use it as
tactic.
well. It's about it's a museum about the Second World War, not about this big trauma that
yeah.
happened in the village. That's usually when people are really interested because when I start talking, we're 1 hour extra. So yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes when you get to the part where, yeah, it's really about this really traumatic event, then you get sometimes this response of like, ooh, why would you want to sort of keep the memory of this really bad thing alive? Then you have to explain, yeah, it's really important that we do this.
Yeah.
Why is it? Because it sometimes for me it feels like you're not only inheriting your family history, you're also a bit inheriting the trauma. But because we are all famous a bit for keeping on telling our family history, why is it? I always find this so peculiar.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's the reason why it is important that we talk about it, and specifically we as like third and fourth generation, is that, yeah, we're sort of in the bridge between the short-term commemoration by, yeah, first and second generation, and what will happen in the future when, yeah, they are gone, and how will people look back on these events, let's say 100 years in the future or something like that. We're probably the bridge between this sort of short-term, long-term.
Feels a bit that way, doesn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, because we were, I think we're the last generation that still feels the personal connection right now because we met people. We were
Yep.
able to hear the stories directly from them. I think our children will not be able to because they wouldn't have known those people anymore. And yeah, that for me that's indeed a very big driver because I really want to keep the stories alive. Because if you see what's happening today, it's coming so close. War is still here. It hasn't changed.
Yeah.
And it's coming again the last few months. It's becoming close all of a sudden to home. We have
Mhm.
people from Ukraine who are refugee in the village of Neselkizem. They visit the museum. They're in tears because they say this happened 75 years ago here. It's now happening in our hometown. It's only 20 hours drive from here. That's so weird. Yeah.
Yes, it's suddenly so close. And I think, well, I think what you tell when these people are in tears, you get to experience their emotion directly. And I think it's it hits so much different if you're standing in front of a person and they tell their story, no matter if it's Second World War related or present day related. They're telling a story and you are emotionally connected to them. It's a difference when you read a history book that's telling, well, over 100,000 people were imprisoned in Neuengamme and only half of them did not survive. It's an incredibly high number, but it's a number. And it's not someone standing in front of you and saying like, oh, I survived Auschwitz. Oh, I knew someone who survived Auschwitz. My family survived Auschwitz. That hits different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's less about the passing on historical data and more about passing values. Is that it?
I think it's values, and I think people learn better when it's about emotions, because I think when people hear, okay, all these men were taken from Minsk-Kiesigam to Neuengamme, it's at first it's a group of people, no clear faces, but then I think I hear that Tom's grandmother was a small girl who had from then on to grow up without her father. I think immediately most people can think about, oh, how was I at that age? What did my father mean to me? And what would it mean to me if I had been in that situation? And I think that's a learning on a deeper level and I think the more of these stories of how it did not end in 1945. May 8 is a wonderful day. It needs to be celebrated, but it did not end for so many people because the hardship, the lives you pended, the lives changed forever, the grief in the families, the missing person at the table. I mean, those are the things that people can, I think, understand. Okay, this is why this is still important, and values passed on, that were given to the family by that person who was persecuted, or maybe values that developed because of the experience of persecution, and to see how these lines connect our presence to the future is, I think, very important. I mean, there's not it's all a continuum. We have the past, we have the present, and the future. It's not cut clearly.
Yeah, there's no
about
end
it.
to discrete stories, basically.
No,
Right?
it's
We
true.
like to think about it like that, like, oh yeah, World War II ended that day. But yeah, it's all just one connected whole.
Yeah, we're still talking about it, and it has had, for us, I think, it has such big influence on our lives. 8 years past, it's incredible almost. Yeah, but
Yeah.
I like to think as well that even though this was such a cruel time and so many cruel things happened, good has happened from it as well afterwards. What I see today, the impact that we can have. When people visit museums, I've been guiding groups in Neuengamme, but also in Minsk-Kiesigam, telling these stories, telling what happened, and you really see the mind shift that people go through, the values that they experience. If we are able to reach only a few people, making them think about right and wrong, and giving them nuance and develop their critical thinking, I think we're doing a good job. And then from even something so horrible, good can rise. I think that's my driver to tell these stories and to do this stuff as a volunteer. Yeah.
I just hope it works. Because every time when we are talking together, I think like, yeah, we're achieving something. But then I go outside of this bubble and I think, okay, the Holocaust, especially now, got so much instrumentalized right now. I mean, don't want to bring up actual politics, but Putin is using an excuse. It's using the Holocaust as an excuse to denazify the Ukraine. I mean, that's I feel for me, it basically feels like they are shitting on our remembrance. And people in the COVID pandemic wearing David stars to say that, oh, we have to be vaccinated. Or if we are not vaccinated, we are going to be excluded and hunt like Jews in the Holocaust. They did not open any history book in their life, and they're using these traumas that we actually have in our family to just, I don't know what they want, attention, or feeling as a victim. I don't know what they like to be a victim, but I just hope that how can we reach these people? Probably we can't because they have a closed mind. But if we get to manage to just put a little crack in it with emotions and with stories, maybe, I hope you're right, maybe we can reach them.
Well, I've had these conversations with people, especially during the COVID scene, and I've heard the same stories that you talk about right now. But once you give them the clear input on what really happened and your personal connection, it opens their mind. So I think it's the power of the story is very strong. I think it's the trying to reach everyone. That's the challenge. Scale it. That's where still work. But hey, we're doing a podcast, so maybe that can help out as well.
Yeah, maybe we can. I mean, I'm open for discussion with everyone who is willing to discuss.
I would like to come back to Tom's point. I think it's important that we remember. Yes, we can maybe reach a few people, and that makes a big difference. And I think, in a sense, we are role models even for the people in our environment, in our community. I mean, simply by being able to say, I have my young committee friends in all these different countries, and I feel it's a thing. It has a real power to be able to say I've friends in many different places with different stories, different backgrounds, and through all of you, I also learned so much about your countries, and just in little things, without you telling me, sitting down to tell me, oh, I wanted to tell you about Belgium and how it functions, but just by hearing little things, and simply by saying, for example, to my son, or I have a meeting this morning with my young committee friends, and both Toms are sitting in Belgium, and Franzi is sitting in a different part of Hamburg. It's showing you can have friends anywhere. You can build a connection to people. Or when we did our podcast with Alexander in the spring, I mean, he lives in Croatia, so I think we do things on a small level. We're not going to change everything right away, but we're changing.
Every little drop helps.
In our close surroundings.
Yeah, sometimes it's enough to just be the one person in the group when when some of these topics come up. Maybe it's enough to just be the one person in the group, say like, hey, I actually know a bit of this stuff. Let me tell you a few things.
Exactly.
Even it's a nice conversation starter, yeah.
Well, sometimes, I mean, that's also why it's so good that we all talk to each other about it, because it makes us, I think, more equipped to say a few things, even in a setting like a party where people don't want to dive into it, but we are so much better at saying it concisely because we're talking about it together. And then we can rest our case, and if people want to talk more, they can come up to us. But if we have said our 3 sentences, I think that's more than enough.
Can you tell it in 3 sentences? I'm usually gone for half an hour when I start talking. But...
Well, I always say, I mean, there are people around the world who actually have a personal connection, a family connection to this time, and simply for that reason, you you need to know about this time because it continues to have an effect, and I think that's, I mean, I know I have not convinced everybody I've said this to, but at least it's my answer to people who say, well, we need to stop talking about this. The poor children, they are not responsible. They don't need to learn about it at school.
Yeah, responsible? No, not for the history, but for the learning of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're responsible for the future, and we need to give them all the luggage they need to do good in the future. Yeah, that's nice. Okay, but then I also like the fact that you talked about, Svenja, that you meet new people and this is the conversation starter. But it doesn't end there because indeed I've learned so much about Germany and Hamburg, and I've had I think a few weeks ago somebody came up to me and was like, "Why do you always go to Hamburg? You're there like 6 times a year. What the hell are you doing there?" You know, it was Germany, like it was bad in the Second World War. I love it when people talk to me like that. It's like, yeah, one of my best friends are in Hamburg. Actually, might be me moving there when I retire. Could be. I've
Oh yeah.
grown so in love with the city. It feels like a second home, but it does, and uh, yeah, it goes further than only the story. It's a catalyst for good connections. So yeah, that's what I like about this as well. All right. Wow. We're already an hour in, so we're doing a good job filling our podcast with a lot of good stuff. But maybe this was a very good second episode in what I hope is going to be something very regular. Um, I think we're definitely going to continue and come up with something nice, cool episode next. So maybe from our side, it's very interesting. If you are hearing this and you like what we're talking about and you want to join us, we're always looking for new, interesting guests on our podcast to continue. So just reach out and bring your story to the table. Um, Also, if you want to grab more info on what happened here, you can always look at the show notes. The show notes are published on our website. It's Neuengamme.international, and there you can jump to the Young Committee. You can find everything you like, or on the Neuengamme Generations channels. It's on Spotify, on Apple Podcast, on SoundCloud. Wow, we're present in a lot of different things. That's kind of cool. So yeah, that leaves me to thank my wonderful panel members for today. Thank you for being here, of course, Francie and Svenja, and also Tom Lemons for being here. It was wonderful chatting up with you about this wonderful topic that is connected to our lives. And yeah, I actually hope to see you guys pretty well in real life soon. And I really look forward to our next podcast together about Neuengamme Generations.
Well, thank you, Tom, for facilitating our conversation and making sure that despite all the things we had in mind we wanted to talk about, we stayed on course. And thank you for hosting us also. I mean, you do all the recording, etc. And thank you.
Well, happy to do so. Okay, see you soon, guys. Bye.
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 Bye.